All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into the experiences of ONAGH,
ONAGH.
a female U.S. Air Force veteran.
Wow.
And,
This is a really interesting one.
yeah, and a deeply unsettling question that kind of surfaces in a lot of her writings. And it's this feeling of being watched and then this haunting realization that, and no one came.
And no one came.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got quite a collection of her personal records and reflections to sort of help us understand this.
I mean,
We've got
this is like a very direct look into her.
it's unfiltered.
Yeah. So our goal in this deep dive is to really kind of explore the events that led to ONAH's sense of constant surveillance.
Right.
And especially concerning a man named Dawn Stovner. And we're going to examine what that phrase, "and no one came," signifies within her story. And later on, we'll consider a potential connection between Dawn Stovner and Linda,
Okay.
an eligibility manager at the Loma Linda VA Medical Center, who ONAGH encountered years later.
Interesting.
Okay, so let's unpack all of this by looking at ONAH's early time in the Air Force.
Okay. Sounds good.
So I think what's really interesting to note right away is how quickly her records became classified. So in 1988, ONAGH was assigned to a Special Operations Group and received a top-secret security clearance.
A top-secret clearance.
And I think it's helpful to remind folks listening that a top-secret clearance is the highest level of security clearance in the U.S. government.
For sure.
Meaning you have access to information that could cause exceptionally grave damage to national security if disclosed without authorization.
Right.
It's very, very sensitive stuff.
Absolutely.
As she mentions in her writings, being one of the first women in such a role meant that all of her Air Force records were classified.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So right away,
Well,
we've got a situation where her entire service history is essentially shrouded in secrecy.
Exactly. And it's interesting because then you look at her early experiences on the flight line in 1988 and 1989.
Okay.
And they seem quite significant. She describes feeling like an outsider as the only woman in her squadron.
Oh, wow.
Interestingly, she found a connection with a male F-15 crew chief who was temporarily working on the F-16 line.
Okay.
And they bonded over this shared experience of feeling a bit out of place.
Right.
Even being the target of some harmless pranks.
Kind of camaraderie of the unusual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a reminder that sometimes solidarity can be found in those really unexpected shared circumstances, even across different roles within a larger organization.
Yeah, you find your people wherever you can.
Exactly. And so if we consider this early sense of being somewhat on the periphery, even within her own unit, it might have implications later when she describes feeling exposed and without recourse.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this connection with the F-15 crew chief also seems noteworthy for another reason.
Okay, what's that?
They had a 6-month relationship. So they met playing golf on base. Their schedules lined up.
Wow, so they were spending a lot of time together.
They were.
Yeah.
He even moved into her mobile home neighborhood, and they carpooled.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it kind of paints a picture of a close, intertwined life.
Yeah, very much so.
During that time. But here's where things get really interesting for us as we try to understand ONAH's later experiences.
Okay.
He never told her he was only on the base temporarily.
Oh, wow.
That he was awaiting orders to Germany.
He just left.
Essentially.
Huh.
And that feels like a significant omission.
Yeah, absolutely.
That could certainly affect someone's sense of trust and security.
Oh, for sure.
In future relationships.
Right, because you think you're building something.
You do. And then suddenly it's just gone.
Gone.
Yeah.
And she doesn't know why.
Right.
Yeah.
So that undisclosed information introduces this element of unexpected departure in a close relationship, and that might really color how she interprets later interactions.
Well, absolutely.
Particularly with someone like Dawn Stovner.
Exactly.
Let's move on to his appearance in her narrative.
Okay.
Much later in time.
Okay, so Dawn Stovner enters the picture.
All right.
And his communication with ONAGH is characterized by these rather odd keyword exchanges.
Okay.
She describes his word choices as close, but not quite right.
Close, but not quite right.
Yeah. So, for example, using icicle instead of ice, or glaze instead of glass. And she likened it to those early online translation services like Babelfish.
Oh, yeah, I remember Babelfish.
Some of you listening might remember Babelfish.
Yeah.
Producing these translations that were often grammatically correct.
Right.
But kind of missed nuances.
Nuances of language.
Yeah, in everyday language.
Yeah. So it created this feeling of someone trying to sound familiar,
Okay.
but not quite hitting the mark.
Like they'd studied up on how to talk to her,
Yeah.
but hadn't quite mastered it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And what really stands out is Ona's growing suspicion that Dawn Stovner was a complete stranger.
Okay.
Despite these attempts to appear to know her.
That would be unnerving.
Absolutely.
To have someone acting like you have this shared history,
right,
but you have no idea who they are.
Exactly. And that feeling of being observed or even known by someone who doesn't genuinely understand your experiences.
Right.
That can be deeply unsettling.
Absolutely.
And create a really profound sense of vulnerability.
Like you're exposed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she really actively tested this suspicion.
Oh, okay.
So she recounts deliberately sharing declassified Air Force stories as if they were her own experiences.
Oh, wow.
And it seemed that Dawn Stovner recognized these inconsistencies.
So he knew she was lying. So that suggests he had some level of information about her past, enough to identify a fabrication, but not the lived experience itself.
Exactly.
It's really interesting that she took that proactive approach.
Yeah.
You know, to try and understand the nature of the potential threat.
Yeah, she wasn't just passively observing.
Right.
She was actively probing the limits.
Probing the limits.
Of Dawn Stovner's knowledge.
Wow, that's smart.
Yeah.
So this leads us to what she describes as a pivotal event.
Okay.
The night in paradise.
Okay. August 29th, 2009.
08/29/2009.
ONAGH is living in paradise, and she sets a very deliberate trap.
A trap. Yeah.
Aiming to trap the syntax error.
Trap the syntax error. What does that mean?
Essentially to see if Dawn Stovner's responses would align with someone very specific from her past.
Okay.
The F-15 crew chief.
The F-15 crew chief.
David Cage Caggiano.
All right, so she's thinking this Dawn Stovner might be Cage.
Yes.
Okay.
So she meticulously recreated a scene from her time in the mobile home in South Carolina with Cage.
Oh.
And it's a scene so precisely duplicated that she believed it would trigger a specific, almost unconscious reaction.
Oh, wow.
If he were indeed Dawn Stovner.
So it had to be something very specific.
Very specific.
To elicit that kind of response.
Yeah. And the level of detail and emotional weight in this moment, as described in her writings, it's significant.
Right. She's putting a lot of thought into this.
She is.
Yeah.
And she whispers, "I know you," to Dawn Stovner.
She whispers, "I know you."
Yeah. And she's very acutely aware of his reaction.
Okay.
Looking for that subtle inconsistency.
Right.
What she called the wrong rhythm, the wrong skip in his response.
The wrong rhythm, the wrong skip.
Something that would resonate with a deep personal familiarity.
Right. So not just intellectual recognition.
No.
But like a gut feeling.
Yes.
A deep connection.
Exactly.
Okay.
And his reaction confirmed her suspicion.
Okay.
Dawn Stovner was not Cage.
So it was a setup and it worked.
It did.
Huh.
But the story doesn't end there.
Of course not.
ONAGH believes that exactly 1 week later,
1 week later,
Dawn Stovner revealed that he had access to her military file.
Whoa.
Likely as a way to unnerve her.
So this is a huge escalation.
It is.
From these strange keyword exchanges to now accessing classified information.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's a really significant shift in the narrative.
Oh, absolutely. And that alleged revelation really underscores the potential power imbalance here.
Right.
And the serious violation that ONAGH may have experienced.
Yeah, because accessing classified information, regardless of the method, represents a significant breach of privacy and security.
For sure.
And undoubtedly amplified her fear.
Right.
And that feeling of being under surveillance.
Exactly. It's like all of a sudden the stakes just got so much higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the inconsistencies in Dawn Stovner's knowledge are really important here.
Okay. How so?
He was, in her words, clueless about a fighter jet flight line, getting many details wrong while getting a few correct. Again, echoing those earlier keyword exchanges.
Right. Close, but not quite right.
Yeah.
Right.
But then he brought up Florida.
Florida.
And this is the point where ONAGH says she became very, very scared.
Very, very scared.
Because this was a top secret training mission.
Okay.
Something that would have been heavily redacted.
Right.
Even if it had been declassified by 2009.
So how could he have known about that?
Exactly.
That's a good question.
And this detail about the Florida mission is particularly concerning because it suggests a level of access to highly sensitive information that an ordinary individual would not typically possess.
Right. An average person off the street shouldn't know about this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she directly accused him of hacking a government database.
She accused him.
She did.
Wow, what did he say to that?
And he replied by identifying himself as a certified network engineer.
A certified network engineer.
With supposed access to any database.
So he's basically saying, I could do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it just paints this disturbing picture
of
a potential abuse of technical skills
right.
and unauthorized data access.
Huge red flag.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the realization hits her in the jacuzzi.
Okay.
Paradise was lost.
Paradise was lost.
This beautiful ranch house, the place she had considered her sanctuary, now felt completely exposed.
Wow.
She understood the potential scope of his access.
To all of her information.
Yeah, to her personal information.
That loss of a sense of safety and security, that's a profound consequence of this kind of situation.
It is.
You know, feeling surveilled.
Yeah.
Having your private information exposed.
Exactly.
The idea that even your most personal spaces can be compromised.
Right.
It really contributes to that pervasive feeling of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And a breakdown of trust in your surroundings.
Absolutely.
Like, where can you feel safe, if not even your own home?
And ONAH's focus initially was on trapping and prosecuting who she believed was her stalker.
Okay.
Maybe initially overlooking the broader implications.
Right, like she's focused on this one individual.
Exactly.
Okay.
She mentions a lesson from her youth about the importance of the first shot.
Oh, wow.
Suggesting a mindset of needing to take decisive action.
Take charge of the situation.
Yeah, but the confrontation by the pool was clearly tense. She describes feeling completely naked and vulnerable. While Don Skovner repeatedly asserted that he was there to help her.
That's so creepy.
It is.
That contrast between her vulnerability and his reassurances. Like a classic manipulation tactic.
It is.
To make her feel like she needs him.
Exactly.
Even though he's the one who's making her feel unsafe.
Right. And his apparent knowledge of tailhook.
Tailhook.
A highly sensitive event, very likely detailed within her military file.
Okay.
Further solidifies his access to her records.
Right. So this is more confirmation that he's got her file.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
And it really erodes any remaining possibility of trust.
Right, because how else would he know about that?
Exactly.
Unless he'd seen her file.
And in that moment, ONAGH recounts starting to tell detailed fabricated stories.
Oh, wow. So she's still trying to protect herself.
She is in the jacuzzi as a way to buy herself time.
Buy herself time.
To try and formulate a plan.
Okay.
About 3 weeks later, he brings up the 1994 earthquake.
The 1994 earthquake.
And his accuracy regarding this event, including specific keywords and facts, really strengthened her conviction.
That he was accessing a government database.
Yeah.
So this is interesting because before he was clueless about the flight line.
Exactly.
But now he's got these very specific details about an earthquake that suggests his information isn't coming from personal recollection or casual research, but rather from structured data-driven sources.
Exactly.
Wow.
And then comes this really unsettling accusation from the married man with the Soviet wife. You're a traitor. You belong in prison.
You're a traitor. You belong in prison.
And this really throws ONAGH for a loop.
Of course.
Because she believed she had been discovered.
Right.
But perhaps by the wrong people.
What do you mean by the wrong people?
As she perceived this individual as not being intelligent enough to have independently obtained this information.
So someone fed him this information?
Potentially.
Okay.
And this introduces this further layer of complexity.
Right, because now we're wondering who else might be involved or aware of these events.
Right.
And this accusation also injects a political dimension into ONAH's narrative.
It does.
And it really amplifies her sense of being targeted by potentially powerful unknown entities.
Yeah.
And then you've got the reference to the Soviet wife and Ukraine.
Yeah.
It adds this element of international intrigue.
It does.
And potentially escalates the perceived threat to national security in her mind.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And it's around the end of September 2009 that phrase, "and no one came," takes on such a powerful meaning.
And no one came.
ONAGH describes waiting.
Waiting for what?
She expected some form of intervention.
Okay. From who?
Perhaps Cage, law enforcement, or someone from what she calls the intricate military-industrial complex.
Okay, so she's thinking someone's got to step in here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Her reasoning was that a leak of top-secret information by someone with potential ties to Ukraine would surely trigger a response.
Yeah, because of national security concerns?
Exactly. And this expectation of intervention reflects a fundamental trust in the systems designed to safeguard national security.
Right.
And the individuals operating within those systems.
Yeah.
And given ONAH's own experience in security clearance,
Right.
she would have had a certain understanding of protocols
Yeah.
and the anticipated responses to breaches of this nature.
Right. So she's thinking this is how it's supposed to work.
Exactly.
Okay.
But then the subject was simply dropped.
Just dropped.
There was no more discussion about the Air Force or the earthquake.
Like it never happened.
It's as if the entire exchange had been erased from their conversations.
Huh.
And yet no one intervened.
No one intervened.
No one came.
Wow.
And this seems to be the core of her disillusionment.
Right.
And the central mystery of her experience.
That silence is deafening.
It is.
Yeah.
Because this sudden end to the conversation, coupled with the apparent lack of any external response, really reinforces ONAH's feeling of isolation
Of course.
and abandonment in the faces of potentially serious security incident.
Right. She's basically on her own.
She is.
Yeah.
And it raises these significant questions about the effectiveness and responsiveness of those safeguards.
The safeguards that are supposed to be in place.
Right, that are supposed to be in place.
Wow.
So now let's fast forward a bit
Yeah.
to a much later period.
Yeah.
October, November 2020.
Right.
And the introduction of Linda, the eligibility manager at the Loma Linda VA Medical Center.
Okay.
And this is where we start to explore a possible connection to these earlier events.
Okay, sure. I'm intrigued.
So the interaction with Linda is marked by a similarly unsettling sense of resistance and disbelief.
Resistance and disbelief.
Regarding ONAH's veteran status.
Really?
Linda reportedly attempted to invalidate her veteran paperwork.
Oh, hold on.
Claiming that the VA system showed her as not a veteran.
How is that even possible?
Right?
She's got a federal resume.
She does.
We've got all these documents.
We do.
And she's saying the system shows her as not a veteran.
As not a veteran.
And possibly a dependent.
And possibly a dependent.
That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
Wow.
And this immediately resonates with ONAH's earlier documented difficulties.
Right.
In having her military service properly recognized by the VA.
Okay.
As detailed in her writings, like expectation of declassification and ONAH Hopkey VA-story.pdf.
Right. So this isn't a new problem for her.
It's not.
This is something she's been dealing with for a while.
For years.
Yeah.
So what really stands out in that interaction with Linda is what happened when Linda saw ONAH's physical compensation and benefits award letter.
Okay.
She apparently disappeared into a locked office.
Into a locked office?
For nearly 20 minutes.
20 minutes?
That's not a typical reaction for a routine verification.
No, that's not typical at all.
It makes you wonder what she was doing behind that locked door.
Right. Was she conducting a more expensive check of ONAH's records?
Maybe.
Was she consulting with someone else, potentially? Or was it something else entirely?
We don't know.
That's very strange.
It is.
Yeah.
And when Linda returned, accompanied by another employee, they reportedly interrogated ONAH about the letter.
Interrogated her.
Questioning its origin.
Wow.
And her veteran benefits officer.
Even after she explained she had worked through an attorney to obtain it?
Yes.
That's so strange.
It is. And then Linda allegedly refused to verify the award letter.
She refused.
Claiming that no one in Loma Linda eligibility was answering the phone.
Oh, come on.
Implying that the letter might be fraudulent.
So she's basically saying it's fake.
Yeah.
Even though it's a real document? This is unbelievable.
It is. And the refusal to verify a formal award letter, especially by the eligibility manager herself, does appear highly unusual.
It does.
And could certainly be interpreted as a deliberate attempt to undermine ONAH's legitimate veteran status.
Right. And her access to benefits.
Exactly.
It's like they're trying to erase her service.
It is.
Wow.
And to make things even stranger, Linda reportedly held on to the award letter for 10 days.
10 days.
And then mailed it back with an incorrect address.
An incorrect address.
It's hard not to see this as potentially intentionally difficult treatment.
Yeah, it's like they're going out of their way to make things difficult for her.
Exactly.
This mishandling of official documentation, particularly after questioning its authenticity, it just fuels the suspicion that Linda's actions might have gone beyond simple bureaucratic errors.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this brings us back to a key part of our mission today.
Okay.
Could Linda, in her position at the VA, With access to veteran records and potentially information about individuals who might be flagged within the system,
Right.
have any connection to the information that Don Stovner seemed to possess years earlier, or to the lack of response ONAGH experienced in 2009.
It's a good question.
And while our sources don't provide a direct confirmed link between Don Stovner and Linda,
Okay.
what's particularly interesting for us to consider is the timeline and the nature of their interactions with ONAGH.
Okay, I'm listening.
So both Don Stovner in 2009 and Linda in 2020 displayed a potentially hostile and obstructive approach toward ONAGH, particularly concerning her military service
Right.
and her status as a veteran.
It's a pattern.
It is.
Yeah.
Don Stovner appeared to have accessed her military file in 2009.
Right.
And then years later, Linda seemed to be trying to invalidate her veteran status.
Within the VA system.
Exactly.
Right.
So could Linda, with her access to VA records in 2020,
Right.
have somehow been connected to the information Don Stovner had years prior?
That's possible.
Or could her actions be a continuation of a pattern
Okay.
where ONAGH perhaps flagged within government systems due to the earlier potential breach,
Okay.
continued to face resistance
Right.
and disbelief when trying to access support?
So it's possible Linda's actions aren't directly connected to Don Stovner,
Right.
but are a result of some kind of flag on ONAH's records
Exactly.
because of that earlier incident.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to reiterate that we don't have definitive proof of a connection.
Right.
However, the thematic similarities and the
Yeah.
focus on potentially undermining ONAH's veteran status and her access to support
Right.
are striking.
They are.
And this could suggest a possible, though unconfirmed,
Right.
overlap in a broader pattern of interference.
Okay.
And the lack of intervention in 2009, and no one came,
Yeah.
could potentially be part of a larger context,
Right.
where ONAH's attempts to navigate these systems
Mm-hmm.
were met with consistent resistance,
Right.
disbelief, or even active obstruction.
It's a chilling thought
It is.
that someone who served their country could be treated this way.
It's a deeply unsettling feeling
Yeah.
that a veteran who may have experienced a serious breach of classified information
Right. Yeah.
that arguably should have triggered a significant response
Mm-hmm.
instead felt abandoned.
Abandoned by the very systems that are meant to protect her.
Exactly.
And then years later, she faces similar resistance from within the very system that is designed to provide her with support.
It's a lot.
It is.
So the central questions raised by ONAH's account remain.
Okay.
Who was truly behind the surveillance she experienced?
Right.
And why did the apparent compromise of sensitive military information
Yeah.
not elicit the expected intervention?
And no one came.
It really encapsulates a profound sense of betrayal
It does.
and a potential systemic failure.
A failure to protect
Yes.
and a failure to respond.
So as we conclude this deep dive into ONAH's experiences, we're left with a final thought-provoking question for you.
Okay.
Consider the implications of what we've explored today.
Right.
What might ONAH's story reveal about potential vulnerabilities within large systems? And what are the lingering questions when expected safeguards seemingly fail to materialize?
Right.
What does it signify when a veteran's attempts to signal potential security breaches are met with silence?
Silent.
And years later, with apparent resistance within the very institution meant to care for them.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
Yeah.
This deep dive into ONAH's account offers a glimpse into a complex and deeply personal story.
Right.
But it also raises broader and deeply concerning questions about trust, security, and accountability.
Huge questions.
They're within the systems that are meant to protect us.
It really makes you think.
It does.